Why are grass types so bad? They're one of the 3 flagship types in Pokemon, yet they're so much worse than fire and water. Why? This is not fair! Oh, don't mind me, I was just reading a letter from my good buddy.
Name and address withheld.
And honestly, he brings up some great points about grass types and, being bad. The simple surface level answer is just too many weaknesses and generally being a type that focuses on slowly whittling down your opponent as opposed to just brutally one-shotting them like a lot of other types do, which, let's be honest, is just the optimal way of playing the game. But what if I told you the whole picture was way more complex than that? Here is the whole history of the grass type. And maybe we'll do all the other types at some point too. This could be like a whole 18-part series. But drop a like, let me know that you enjoy this type of content, and that's it. Okay, bye. Well, the fact of the matter is that most of these problems originate from the classic Gen 1 games, partly because the type chart is mostly the same now as it was then. It's just one of those things that doesn't tend to change much. Ironically, the Bulbasaur line is probably one of the best picks for any Kanto region team. And as far as competitive gameplay goes, Venusaur has almost always been ranked above both Charizard and Blastoise. But perhaps Bulbasaur being the poster child for the grass type has actually led to some of the type's shortcomings. If you ask any fan back in the day, Bulbasaur was commonly seen as the easy mode pick, since it has a favorable matchup against each of the first 3 gyms, outright beating rock and water types and resisting Surge's electric types. Not only that, but Gen 1 Razor Leaf is a comically broken attack thanks to critical hits being calculated based on speed. There's also the glitch where Leech Seed can feed off the effects of Toxic, effectively 3-hit KOing any Pokemon in the game. But don't get grasslighted into thinking this is the best approach for the main story, because, well, it just isn't. Like I said, hit fast, hit hard, bada bing, bada boom, this is not it. But it's certainly effective in competitive gameplay where you'll more than likely have to deal with more tanky Pokemon. To put it lightly, a lot of Gen 1's mechanics and the types of gyms used actually give grass types quite the edge. Since most Gen 1 grass Pokemon were also part poison types, 64% of them to be exact, that means their weakness to other poison types was negated, and while they used to be double weak to bugs, poison could also beat bug at the time. And like we've mentioned in past videos, Beedrill was realistically the only Pokemon who could do any real damage with bug-type moves. Well, and Jolteon learns Pin Missile, but that hardly counts. Poison is by no means a good type. In fact, it's one of the few most would say is actually worse than Grass. But the two actually pair together quite nicely. This meant most grass types only had to worry about flying and then fire and ice, which were 2 relatively uncommon types at the time. And if you're Exeggutor, then lucky you! The Psychic type is nothing short of a gift from Arceus itself in Gen 1. But when the Gen 1 chicanery that aided the grass types inevitably fell away, we were left with a less than stellar typing. Gen 2 is where things really start to fall apart for grass types. Razor Leaf is nerfed due to the change in critical hit calculations, and most grass types from this point on are going to be paired with far worse typings that don't cover their weaknesses. Or in the case of Meganium, there's no secondary typing at all. Speaking of Meganium, why is this Pokemon the first thing that comes to mind when people think about crappy grass types? Well, for all the reasons we just discussed. No secondary type to cover weaknesses, unlike Venusaur. No broken move to use, unlike Venusaur. And no easy gyms to breeze through, unlike Venusaur. In fact, as I outlined in my worst types video a couple years ago, Johto in general is just incredibly hard on grass types. So it's not entirely Meganium's fault for falling short here. In general, this is where we start to see a problem with grass types significantly lagging behind the other types in terms of viable offensive moves. Giga Drain is introduced here, but it's only 60 base power and has 5 PP. Don't spend it all in one place! Leaf Blade gets introduced in Gen 3, but it's exclusive to Sceptile. It's not until Gen 4 when grass types finally start to receive some good viable moves, namely Seed Bomb, Power Whip, Leaf Storm, and Energy Ball. Leaf Blade also finally gets passed on to some other candidates, but even then, most of these moves would never become TMs. At least until Sword and Shield rolled around more than 13 years later. The other bad news is that as abilities have grown and become more defining over time, it seems like most grass types are constantly getting stuck with the same old subpar ones, like Leaf Guard or Effect Spore. The worst news is that in the 10 years it took for all of this to happen, 2 of grass's biggest foes, Ice and Fire, have become far more common types. And bug types received a massive overhaul in Gen 5, making them far more viable. Grass may have finally received some support in Gens 4 and 5, but all that wasted time in Gens 2 and 3 put them far behind the 8-ball. Another bad trend that broke out along the way is the fact that for the most part, grass types have been getting slower and slower over the years. And to make matters worse, many of these slow grass types are paired with secondary types that make their weak spots all the more vulnerable. Take Chestnut, Shiinotic, Appleton, and Hisuian Decidui for example. All of these are slow grass types with glaring double weaknesses that make any bulk they have completely insignificant. On the other hand, you have decent fast grass types like Sceptile and Whimsicott, but these are far less common than the slower tanks. If you're trying to be a tank, you can't have windows made of glass. On these streets, it's just better to be a glass cannon most of the time. Now, I know, a lot of these reasons why grass is so bad is from stuff that happened a long time ago, mostly in the first 5 to 7 years of Pokemon's lifespan. So why is it still so relevant in 2022, you may ask? Well, Game Freak only really gets one shot at balancing the game every 3 years, and to say they miss the mark most of the time would be putting it lightly. They've been trying to buff Ice since 2016, and it's probably still one of, if not the worst type. Truth be told, grass is just painfully above that threshold where Game Freak feels the urge to do anything drastic to them. Ice, Poison, and Bug are still far worse types at the end of the day, so most of their attention goes towards buffing those three as we've recently seen. That's not to say grass hasn't received any aid though. In Gen 6 they became immune to powder and spore-based moves. I know, helpful, right? But Gen 6 did also introduce a new field effect in grassy terrain, and for a few years this one was looked down upon by the other terrains in competitive gameplay. But everything changed when Rillaboom attacked. Not only does Rillaboom have access to the incredibly powerful ability Grassy Surge, but it's also capable of learning the newly introduced move Grassy Glide. If you're a competitive player, I'm pretty sure you can enter a tournament with a Rillaboom that has Grassy Glide and 3 empty move slots, and you'd still probably win. And it's not like Rillaboom is the only Pokemon who gets access to this incredibly broken move. It's just the one that most easily takes advantage of it due to its ability. Thanks to the addition of both Grassy Surge and Grassy Glide, this type now has to be taken seriously in competitive play. And that's not to say that Grass was completely awful before all of this either. Once again, Kartana is a great example of a grass type that is viable because it's a glass cannon. And even Ferrothorn, despite being a tank, still has been OU every generation since its introduction. It's definitely not like these two have any other reason to be this unusually good. Get that out of here, get that out of here! I will say though, it certainly seems like over the past few generations, grass type has been on a remarkable upswing. At least in terms of competitive usage. But when it comes to the main story, unfortunately this type may forever be doomed to be the lame duck of the starters. I mean, think about when you play through the main campaign of a Pokemon game. Realistically, what do grass types do best? Hit rock and ground types for really big damage, right? I know it also beats water, but most viable water types, even in Gen 1, are part poison, ice, or flying, all things that decimate grass. So if you're looking for a type that beats ground and rock, water does just that, with far fewer weaknesses going against it. And we already know how good fire is as an offensive type, so we can leave that one out of the conversation entirely. The greatest irony is that despite grass beating water types, water actually steals most of grass's thunder. Or, greenery, to stick with the type description. When it comes to the main story of most Pokemon games, which again, where battling with brute force is the optimal way to play, what real reason is there to ever pick a grass starter over a water starter, outside of Gen 1? And I mean like actual Gen 1, not even the Gen 1 remakes. As a result, grass-type starters pretty much need to be carried by their secondary typings, which only applies to Venusaur, Torterra, Chestnut, and Decidui. And Sceptile, kinda. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're Hisuian Decidui or Chestnut, then you've been dealt the worst hand of cards possible. Pretty much only Venusaur and Torterra can make an argument for being the most useful starter in their generations, or at least not the worst, because their secondary typings actually work with them rather than against them. Wow, what a concept! So in conclusion, is grass bad? Yes. And also no. It's certainly the weakest of the 3 starter types, but overall, especially in competitive play, it does have some stuff going for it. At any rate though, remember to like this video if you enjoyed and subscribe for more videos just like this one, because again, maybe this will be a series, maybe it won't be, we'll just have to wait and see. And as always, a big thank you to my channel members for always supporting my content. See you guys next time!